Welcome to Perspectives, the vodcast of the American Mental Health Counselors Association with the National President and Interim CEO/ED, Dr. Beverly Smith. This vodcast will bring to you the perspectives of clinical mental health counseling as it pertains to ethics, public policy and legislation, multiculturalism and social justice, as well as leadership and advocacy. This vodcast will feature experts in the clinical mental health counseling field to enhance the work of clinical professionals and to inform the public. The American Mental Health Counselors Association advocates for over 130,000 licensed clinical mental health counselors in the United States who are licensed to assess, diagnose, and treat mental disorders. We are the only organization working exclusively for clinical mental health counselors. Join the Perspectives for insight from experts on wellness and daily living, current clinical research, integrative healthcare, as well as how to maintain personal, family, and organizational wellness in an anxious and ever-changing world. Let's connect and hear the perspectives.
Hello, I'm Dr. Beverly Smith, President and Interim CEO of the American Mental Health Counselors Association. Today we have a very special guest with us, Miss Jill Cook. Please introduce yourself, share with us a little bit about yourself and your role with ASCA.
Sure. So as you said, I am the executive director of the American School Counselor Association, have been in that position since October of 2020, but I've been with the association a very long time, since late fall of 2001. I've had the great fortune of really seeing the evolution of the association and in part the evolution of the profession in some regards. And I came to ASCA. I started in North Carolina as a teacher. I was a music teacher. I did elementary school and high school chorus. And when I was at elementary school, I had more than 1,000 kids every week at 3 schools. And it just wasn't cutting it for me. It wasn't giving me the connections with students in the way I wanted to connect with students. And so after my second year of teaching, I went back to school and got a master's degree in school counseling from UNC Chapel Hill. And I was a middle school counselor for 7 years in North Carolina. And I got the 7-year itch a little bit and was looking for something else. But before I could even look for the something else, at the time we had an administrator shortage in North Carolina and in my district. And my superintendent asked me if I wanted to be an assistant principal. So I did that for 2 years before moving to Northern Virginia and joining ASCA, coming on staff at that time as the only school counselor on staff. That has certainly shifted over time, but just had the great good fortune to really be given a blank slate in terms of helping the association grow.
Well, I think you've done just that. Based on the things that I've read and from talking with you now and before the broadcast, you are doing an excellent job with ASCA. And so I'm glad that you could be here with us today on Perspectives and just share more of insight as to what's going on with ASCA. I know that you have various legislative initiatives. I know you are supportive of school counselors as they deal with the tragedies and the massive school shootings and so forth. Can you tell us a little bit more about your legislative initiatives?
Sure. Well, as you can imagine, over the last 2 years with the federal funding that's been made available from the pandemic, we've certainly it's been a silver lining, I guess, in relationship to the pandemic, in that a lot of the federal funding to public schools has really had that focus on mental health. And we know President Biden, when he was a candidate and in the State of the Union address in February, has talked about the importance of mental health needs, and especially for students. So the part of the good news is there has been a lot of new positions that have been created to hire school counselors in schools and school social workers, school psychologists. So that piece is wonderful. We know there are many school districts that plan on, even when that money, the federal funding is not available any longer, that will continue those positions, because we know that students can't learn if they have other things going on and they have mental health concerns. We know the goal of school is to help students leave us to go on to pursue their post-secondary opportunities, but they can't do that and they can't learn when there are other things going on. And as we know, the last 2 years, the pandemic just of itself and all that comes with that, and the isolation, and we could talk forever about all the impact on students, as well as the murder of George Floyd, and the looking at equity and diversity and inclusion and what that means, and knowing that for our young people, that's so important. So all that said, there's such a need for so many things, and our kiddos have had a hard year this year. I've heard from many school counselors, just anecdotally across the country, that as hard as 2021, 22 was, 1920 was, this school year has been especially difficult.
I think it's been especially difficult because you have school counselors, you have school psychologists, you have social workers, you have also in schools, you have licensed professional counselors who are providing the work, providing the service. They are frontline workers, and they were frontline workers. And now we move into another year 1, year 2, year 3, and those frontline workers who are providing counseling, they're burnt out, they're tired. So we have to find ways to replenish or pour into them, or to help them deal with the compassion fatigue, because it is real. One of the things that AMHCA is focusing on as well is trying to advocate for additional funding through the Senate Bill 828 and HR 432, so that more funding can go into, yes, Medicare, so that we can be providers for Medicare as LPCs and the licensed marriage and family therapists, but also to advocate for more funding for the mental health crisis that we're dealing with. And that in turn will help those who are serving and working in schools, who are licensed and so forth. It provides more people, more boots on the ground, essentially, to help school counselors to do the work that they have been doing in the midst of a pandemic. And they've done a great job of it. And so we look forward to, coalescing and collaborating.
And for me, that's the word. I think one of the things that, and it's not that we didn't know this, that the pandemic really showed, is that, this work cannot, even though we were isolated, this work cannot be done in isolation or in silos. And so there have been some beautiful examples. I mean, we need community counselors, we need community health agencies, we need practitioners who can see the kiddos and the families, to provide that support out. When school counselors don't do therapy, they don't prescribe medicine, they don't provide diagnoses. So we need your folks, your members who can be that additional support to students and families. And there have been some beautiful collaborations. I've heard of school districts who are now doing that outreach to the community groups and the local folk. There's a school district outside of Columbia, South Carolina, that's providing it for free to all students and families, providing therapy, counseling, for those who have been identified for free. But we know they're not enough. They're not enough who work with students and adolescents and children. And we know the other challenge we hear is in the rural areas. They're just not practitioners for students to be able to make appointments with.
And it's important that we meet the needs of all people. Places and in all locations, and those who are in the rural area, they need mental health support as well. So hopefully with legislation, we can get some bills and some movement so that we can begin to address those issues, because it's really important. There are many licensed professional counselors, licensed mental health counselors, again, that work in collaboration with school counselors to help families and help kids. So, hats off to all of the school counselors, licensed professional counselors, who work really hard during this pandemic, who are still working hard.
Absolutely.
Just to provide services to the students, to the family, and in some cases to the faculty and staff as well.
Yes, and that was as we returned to school, even in the previous school year. That was certainly one of our recommendations in collaboration with other groups we work with. Yes, students' needs were important, but we cannot neglect the faculty and staff and the adults in the building, because this was a shared trauma, shared traumas. It wasn't an isolated event. So addressing their needs are absolutely as important.
I think you're right. It was shared trauma. And I was actually doing a workshop last year for one of the metro systems here in Atlanta, Georgia, on grief and grieving. One of the things what participants said was, we have all experienced corporate mourning, and that's real. And in some cases, some individuals are experiencing prolonged grief.
Yes.
And so those are things that are important for us to give attention to. And so I look forward to us in that joint webinar that we'll do soon, provide outreach service on grief mourning, and how do we move and hold out hope as we're still navigating in a pandemic.
Yeah, and as you said too, and how can we work collaboratively to support our students and our communities in this process?
And you mentioned something a few minutes ago about collaborating, working together, and addressing issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that is vital as well, as we're providing services and providing information on grief and grieving and access to, mental health care. I think that is important. Many people across the country are grieving and mourning and just saddened, and for some outright angry about the mass shootings that have happened in Texas as well as New York. Does ASCA have a response, a statement that you would like to share in reference to those acts of violence?
Sure, absolutely. So on our website at schoolcounselor.org, we have the statement that we sent to our membership the day after the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas. In addition, we have, it's essentially an online toolkit. It's a curation of resources. Some of them are ASCAs and some from other organizations about how to support students in the school community after a school shooting. And I must say, very sadly, that's nothing we created last week after this school shooting. This is something we continually update because this wasn't the first time that happened. And in addition to that statement to our members, we do have a position statement on common sense gun safety and what our recommendations would be about closing loopholes, common sense background checks. We're not a gun organization, but certainly as we think about this school shooting and the shooting in Buffalo and the shooting in California, all that have happened in the last couple of weeks, this is a public health crisis, and it can't be conflated with, now, not saying the mental health piece isn't important, but as we think about this and talk about this, and we know the national conversation, it is a public health crisis around guns and access to guns and certain kinds of guns, and it's not a mental health issue as we think about the Uvalde shooting. We know statistics say that people with mental illness are more often than not the victims of violence than the perpetrators of violence. And I think sometimes we lose some of those statistics as political posturing comes into play. So we do have a congressional letter we created last week that's being sent to certain congressional offices. Other organizations we work with, the school psychologists have done the same thing, National PTA, AFT and NEA have been very involved in some of this work on the public educator front. So, we are working with our colleagues at school psychs, school social worker and school nurses on a collaborative statement, some collaborative messaging as it relates to this, because the fear is, and this, and I've heard families from Uvalde talk about it on the news. Once the news cycle dies down, are we going to lose this conversation, lose this momentum? Will the outrage die down that these 19 babies, were slaughtered?
And it shouldn't die down. The message should not die. And Unfortunately, we've seen times where the message did die until the next tragedy happened.
Exactly.
And that's where we are now. This
Yes.
is the next and the next and the next. So at what point do we change?
Yep.
At what point do we change?
Yep. Yep.
Mm.
And yeah.
You all are doing great work. I look forward to, and I offer up AMHCA as a collaborator. So
Absolutely. Thank you.
all coalesce and work together for the benefit of our kids, our families, and our communities.
Yes.
What we took an oath to do. And so we want to join in with you all, and we want all of us to work together as organizations, because I think we're all working towards the same cause. We all want everyone to be safe and to be healthy.
Yes.
To improve the quality of life. You know,
Yes.
kids deserve to grow up in a safe community. Adults deserve to work in a safe community.
And the other piece in our position statement in the language we've put out since the Uvalde shooting is, you know, we are opposed to arming educators. And I know that conversation has come up again in the wake of the Texas shooting, but schools can't be the answer for all of societal ills. We can't, it just baffles me that's where the conversation goes sometimes, when that's not the systemic issue.
It's not, and I'm glad you said that, because it's not the systemic issue, but unfortunately happens to be an easier route to take
Yep.
for the moment. And then again, as we said before, until the next tragedy happens.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there will be a next time, and we all know it.
Mhm. And so, you know, we have to do something differently and address the root cause. And then the interim where we are now is, how do we help people heal and
Yes.
be able to, you hate to say move forward, because that's a difficult conversation right now for someone who's mourning, they've lost loved ones. It's hard.
Right.
Say, you know, how do we help heal and soothe so that we can be stronger and healthier advocates and deal with the systemic root or systemic problem?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I listened to from someone, the state legislator or the congressman for Uvalde's district, who talked about that $20 million is going to go basically into creating mental health supports in their community, and how he wants to be able to for your members who might make more money, say in Dallas or Houston, he wants to be able to pay LPCs and mental health practitioners to come to their community and be paid a good and fair and strong wage, so they can help support their community. Because as you said, there's no timeline, and everybody's going to be different in terms of their movement and their process and their healing.
And it takes time, and we're still dealing with COVID-19. We're still dealing with the trauma from watching other individuals, you know, killed on social media. And so you take all of that, wrap it up if you can, and we can, but you take all of that, and that's what individuals are having to deal with. That's what the public is having to deal with. The immediate families are dealing with the loss, and there's all of us who are looking, who are experiencing vicarious trauma. So I think to a certain degree, we do have a pandemic, a mental health crisis as well, that we're trying to navigate through. And so hopefully we can begin to work together, although we're in different organizations, but work together for the benefit, again, of our students, our families, our kids, and for our community and the greater community. It's going to take all of us kind of coming together and not working in isolation.
Yes.
So I lend AMHCA's support to the endeavors, and we look forward to uniting and coalescing with ASCA and other organizations to address the issues.
Thank you so much.
I thank you so much for coming on Perspectives. We had agreed to do a webinar coming up soon, and so we will announce that webinar very shortly, whereas we share with the public, we share with communities, families, just some tips on and informational resources on grieving, healing, and holding our hope as we try to rebuild and move forward. So I thank you so much, Jill Cook, for coming on Perspectives. Any last and closing words that you may have for our audience?
Oh, no, I just thank you for the invitation and for the outreach. And it's exactly what we've said throughout this, is that collaboration is key on all fronts to moving forward. And for us, our goal is to support our school counselors so they can support their students. And your members are certainly part of that work as they support students and families and communities. So I look forward to the opportunities.
Thank you, Jill, and thank you for appearing on Perspectives. We look forward to, AMHCA look forward to collaborating with you as well. And again, we will announce and publicize an upcoming webinar that will address and talk about grief and grieving and how do we move forward as a community. So thank you again.
My pleasure.
Thank you for joining the American Mental Health Counselors Association podcast with President and Interim CEO/ED, Dr. Beverly Smith. We hope you will join us for the next episode to connect and hear the perspectives from experts and the organization that exclusively represent clinical mental health counselors. Be well.